you've heard all the debate in the last few weeks about this counteroffensive and how it's going. We certainly have more evidence that it is going relatively well. I mean, for Ukraine, although slow. You point out, though, that there's a lot of preparations being made for the year ahead.
There certainly are. I think that one of the things the Ukrainians are now looking to, and I think the U.S. and some of the supporters of Ukraine are also looking to as well, is longer-term support. We saw that when Secretary of State Blinken was just in Kiev just now, where some of the things that they were talking about was supporting the counteroffensive and making sure that the counteroffensive continues to go on, but then also longer-term support, like, for instance, that depleted uranium munition, because we know that the Abrams tanks that those munitions are for are not set to arrive on the battlefield until later this fall. So that certainly is an important longer-term step. But then, of course, also when we look at some of the F-16s that the Ukrainians are supposed to get. And the Ukrainians are saying that the international community or its supporters and especially the U.S. should have patience with Ukraine as the counteroffensive goes on. But they do say that they are making headway. Here's what we're learning.
Ukrainian troops assaulting Russian positions in eastern Ukraine. Kiev says its forces are piling on the pressure both here and on the southern front line and are gearing up for more. These soldiers practicing mountain warfare specifically to assault Russian-occupied Crimea.
If we come to Crimea, there is a big possibility we would really need these skills. We would definitely be fighting in the mountains because there will be partisan warfare.
But Ukraine's army is still far away from Crimea, and the gains they are making are slow, incremental, and come with a major human cost as the number of dead and wounded escalate. Kiev now specifically telling women with medical education they must register for military service starting October 1st. In an exclusive interview with CNN's Fareed Zakaria, Ukraine's president urging the U.S. to have patience while ruling out any compromises with Vladimir Putin.
Did you see any compromises from Putin in other issues? Did you see? Did somebody saw? Did somebody see? With Chechnya, with Georgia, with Moldova, he occupied all these countries.
But the Russians are facing major issues themselves. Short on manpower and ammo, the U.S. believes Vladimir Putin is actively advancing negotiations with North Korea to provide arms to Russia. This, says North Korean strongman Kim Jong-un praises his country's alleged military advances, claiming Pyongyang has now developed a tactical nuclear submarine, even though South Korea believes the sub is not even capable of normal operations.
We will rapidly pursue the process of converting all medium-sized submarines into attack types in order to turn those existing submarines into nuclear submarines at once.
From Russia, convicted arms trafficker Viktor Bout, who was freed in a prisoner swap with basketball star Brittany Griner late last year, speaking to U.S. media for the first time since the exchange. Bout, who was known as the Merchant of Death and was serving a 25-year sentence for, among other things, conspiring to kill Americans, has always maintained his innocence. In an interview with ESPN, Bout brushing off outrage over his release in the U.S.
The same outrage was in Russia when I was sentenced to 25 years. Many people would say, for what? Just for talking? Are you serious?
We have dramatic video of rescue efforts after a Russian strike in northeastern Ukraine, and it shows emergency workers putting out a fire and digging through the rubble after a cruise missile hit the city of Sumy on Friday. Officials say 3 people were wounded, including 2 pulled from beneath a building destroyed by that strike. Now, earlier in the day, this footage shows the moment when another missile hit President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. Now, the missile hit the center of the city in Kyiv, killing 1 person and leaving 54 others injured. At least 10 buildings were damaged. Ukraine says Russian missiles have also killed 3 people in Kherson and wounded 4 others.
All right, we're turning to India now, where negotiators at the G20 summit have reached a compromise over how to describe the war in Ukraine in their joint communique. That's according to a source familiar with the talks. News of the draft agreement follows a big announcement from summit host Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He said the group of the world's richest nations will welcome the African Union as a permanent new member. CNN's Vedika Sood joins us now from New Delhi. So Vedika, what more are we learning about this compromise language on Ukraine?
Kim, we are getting word that there could be a breakthrough on that compromise language on Ukraine, but what it's going to be, we'll only get to know in a few hours from now, maybe even tomorrow, because this is the final document that goes to the G20 leaders, and all of them need to sign off on it. And when I mean all of them, I obviously also do mean Russia as well as China. While their leaders are not there at this summit, their deputies are. And the big question is, will they be okay with what's really written, the fine reading of that document, and will they consent to, signing it? So as far as we know, according to a source privy to this document and the preparation of it, they have come closer to finalizing that joint declaration, but we have to wait and watch and see how countries react to it, how the leaders react to it at this point. But of course, there has never been a more splintered G20 summit than this in terms of the West and the anti-West blocs. Perhaps one reason, though Beijing hasn't really stated it, for being the reason for Xi Jinping not being here at the G20 summit in New Delhi today. But all eyes will be on what Russia and China have to say once that declaration, that joint final declaration is out at the G20 summit with the lines that they have on Ukraine. I see 3 options here, came to be very blunt here. One is a strong statement, which looks highly unlikely at this point, because obviously all countries need to weigh in. There could be a watered down version like we had at the Bali summit last year, and perhaps a third, which could be a summary by the chair, which is looking highly unlikely now that our source is telling us that there could be a likely consensus and agreement on the stand that the G20 takes on Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine has shattered cities, separated families and destroyed lives. Well, it's also turned many of man's best friends into orphans. Hundreds of dogs and cats have been left behind by owners who've been forced out of their homes. And that's where my next guest steps in. Shelter Friend is an animal rescue and rehab centre that looks after homeless animals, including disabled dogs and cats. Staff there say since the war began, they've literally been overwhelmed with animals in need of a safe home. And joining us now is Marina Bolakovets, who runs the Shelter Friend in Dnipro, Ukraine. Marina, thank you so much for joining us. I think dog and cat lovers all over the world that are watching this, their hearts are with you at this moment. Just talk to me about the work that you and the team are doing. How many animals do you have?
Hi, studio. Hi, US. Hi, world. Thank you very much for inviting me. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all the people who is supporting Ukraine in our difficult times. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, from all the volunteers, from all the dogs and cats, and from all the Ukrainian people. About animals, well, currently I have more than 700 dogs and 250 cats and donkeys and goats. Situation is hard, really hard, but we live on a different scale now. And with every sunrise when we are alive, it's already a blessing. So we keep working, we keep saving. It is hard, it is very hard, but we try to manage.